What up, what up, what up, what up? Mr. Stewart here. German rearmament and the road to war 1933 to 1939. I'm here, Mr. Stewart, just going to take you through all the steps of rearmament and the road to war 1933 to 1939. Thanks for coming. See you in 2. Alright, back at you. So, German rearmament and the road to war. I'm going to take you through some key things. First and foremost, I'm going to move my camera because I'm in the way at the moment. You guys can't really see the events that we're going to cover. So, I'll see you at the end of the video. There we go. You lot can still hear me, which is fantastic. I'm not going to waste time on, can you hear me, can you hear me, da, 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 da. Right, so, events covered in this lesson. You've got 1 to 9 there. They are all the events that eventually led to war. Okay, in particular, we're talking about World War II. I'm not going to read through all of the events, but we're going to go through all of those events on today's PowerPoint. Alright? Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. So let's take our first one. Our first one is 1933, Hitler leaves the League of Nations Disarmament Conference. During the period between 1932 and 1934, the League of Nations held a disarmament conference. Hitler said he would disarm as long as every other nation would do too. If other nations would not do this, then he wanted to be allowed to have an army equal to the size of France. The French obviously refused to cooperate with this. We will not accept this. This gave Hitler the excuse to storm out of the conference while claiming that it was the French and not him who were being unreasonable. These French are being unreasonable? Nine. Germany then left the League of Nations and so was no longer expected to keep to its covenant and work to avoid war. As you can see there, that's a paper released at the time. Germany defies all world powers, quits the League and the arms talks. Leaders decide to launch parley anyway. Okay? Okay. Right, so let's move on. The Dollfuss Affair. The Dollfuss Affair, also known as the failed Anschluss. Okay? So, what does that involve? That was 1934. Hitler was born in Austria, as you know, and he was very, very keen on basically making Germany and Austria as one country. Yeah? So, Hitler's foreign policy included uniting all Volksdeutsch, which means German-speaking countries. The first one he wanted to start off with was, obviously, Austria. Now, aware of Hitler's intentions, the Austrian Chancellor at the time in 1934, also known as Engelbert Dollfuss, who became the Chancellor of Austria in 1932, banned the Nazi Party in Austria. In 1934, Hitler responded by telling Austrian Nazis to create havoc in the country. What they did is they actually murdered Dollfuss. They murdered the Chancellor of Austria. Now, the plot basically failed in taking over Austria because even though they murdered the Chancellor of Austria, the Austrian army supported the government and Mussolini moved his troops onto the Austrian border in preparation to take on Hitler and his army in case they invaded Austria, because they promised that they would stop Hitler's Anschluss. Hitler realised that his army was not strong enough to engage with war with the Italians and Mussolini, so he backed down and claimed that the Austrian Nazi Party had acted alone, had nothing to do with Germany. It's a bit snaky. Okay. You lot having a lovely chat in the conversation there. Please make sure that you're not getting up to no good, otherwise I will have to block you. Okay, so moving on. We're going to look at 1935 rearmament. 1935 rearmament. Before we go on to that, I need to talk to you about what happened on the 13th of January. So something came just before rearmament, which was March 1935. 13th of January 1935 is known as the Saar Plebiscite. As you can see there, the Saar was a rich industrial area which had been given to the League of Nations for 15 years under the Treaty of Versailles. This agreement was due to expire in 1935. So a plebiscite, which means a vote, was held to decide who should govern the area, France or Germany. Now, over 90% of the population voted to rejoin with Germany, and Hitler was able to use this victory as propaganda to show that German-speaking people wanted to unite under the Nazis. He also gained the rich coalfields, which could be used to power his industry and build weapons ready for the future. Again, allowing Nazis to get onto the road to war. Okay. Rearmament. In 1935, at a rally, as you can see in the two images there, called the Freedom to Rearm Rally, Hitler showed off weapons and troops that he had secretly been building. He also announced that he was reintroducing conscription, which basically means forcing men to join the army. This would expand his army to 1 million men and would allow him also in 1936 to develop the Luftwaffe, also known as the Nazi Air Force. This marked the fact that Hitler was sure that he could openly defy the Treaty of Versailles without other countries stopping him. Alright, brilliant. So that's 1935 rearmament. Again, another reason why everybody was on the road to war. Next, what I want to talk to you about is 1935 Anglo-German Naval Agreement. So, the Anglo-German Naval Agreement was in 1935, actually June 1935. This agreement was signed saying that Hitler could build his navy to 35% of the size of the British one. When Germany offered to restrict the growth of its navy and respect Britain's naval supremacy, it was too good an offer for Britain to decline. Britain felt like they had to sign this agreement. This would be a way that they could potentially keep control of the Nazis. Britain also allowed Germany to build 45% of the number of British submarines. Hitler saw this as Britain admitting that the Treaty of Versailles was unfair and that they could, therefore, ignore it. The military terms of the treaty were officially dead, and significantly, Britain hadn't consulted France and Italy before signing this agreement. Now, what's very interesting is, just before this agreement was signed between Britain and Germany, Britain had actually signed the 1935 Stresa Front. This was an agreement between Britain, France and Italy that they would together protect the Treaty of Versailles and stop Hitler from breaking it. So Britain basically went against their word. It is getting a little bit confusing here. I think a little bit confusing. So, what's our next thing that I want to look at? As you can see there, that's the Stresa Front there. Next thing I want to look at is the 1936 Remilitarization and of the Rhineland. Okay. Now, basically, this is really important. Really important. Some people think that this is basically what led to the Second World War. Okay. So, 1936 is actually when it officially happened. But in 1935, France and the USSR signed a Franco-Soviet pact, an agreement to support each other if either was attacked by Germany. Hitler used this pact to claim that Germany was under threat from France and the USSR. having enemies on both sides. He responded to this by sending troops into the Rhineland. So basically, he's getting a bit tricky here. Yeah, he's using the new Franco-Soviet pact as an excuse to send troops into the Rhineland on the 7th of March 1936. Troops were greeted by civilians who gave them flowers. Hitler had been relying on such a welcome. Many of the troops had arrived on bicycle and there was no air support. Hitler knew that his army was still small and even instructed his generals that they were to retreat if they were greeted by any resistance at all, because he believed that they were not strong enough to take on the French. So, could Hitler have been stopped? Of course he could have. Army generals had warned Hitler that if France decided to uphold the Treaty of Versailles, the German army was not big enough to fight. But Hitler's gamble paid off. The remilitarization of the Rhineland was a significant step to the war. The reason being is because Hitler grew confident that he could do as he pleased, and Hitler then turned his attention to considering how he might get around the other terms of the Treaty of Versailles, for example, the forbidden Anschluss with Austria. Now, as you can see there, you've got some soldiers marching into Austria, and you've got marching into the Rhineland, and you've got a map there showing you where the Rhineland is. Fantastic. So, let's move on. 2. 1938, Anschluss with Austria. So, we know that there was a failed Anschluss, but now we are looking at the successful Anschluss in 1938, right? In January 1938, the police raided the headquarters of the Austrian Nazi Party and discovered plans to overthrow the leader of Austria, known as Schuschnigg. Schuschnigg, that's spelled Schuschnigg. There were also huge demonstrations against the government, led by the Austrian Nazis in large towns such as Vienna. Worried about what was happening, Schuschnigg decided he was going to meet up with Hitler. He travelled to Germany. In actual fact, he travelled to Hitler's mountain retreat in Germany. Oh yeah, he had a mountain retreat. Man like Hitler. Anyway, Hitler included 3 Nazi generals in the meeting to intimidate Schuschnigg. Schuschnigg had little to say over the terms that they agreed on, which included appointing a Nazi solicitor named Sudeten Crisis as a minister for the interior. So basically, they agreed that Schuschnigg would have a Nazi solicitor in charge, with the full power over the Austrian police. Nazis were also able to take the roles of ministers of finance and war. Schuschnigg was also to lift any restrictions on the Nazi party in Austria and release Nazis from prison. Hitler also told Schuschnigg to sign the agreement and make the changes within 3 days, or Germany would invade Austria. Schuschnigg had a plan, however. He knew that Hitler wanted to claim that the people of Austria supported Anschluss, so he decided to hold a plebiscite, a vote, plebiscite means vote, to allow the Austrian people to vote on what they wanted. Did they want to be part of Germany, or did they want to remain part of Austria? So did they want Anschluss or not? On the 11th of March 1938, Hitler demanded that the plebiscite be postponed. Schuschnigg agreed, fearing he would not be supported by Britain and France or Italy if he defied Hitler. Hitler then forced Schuschnigg to resign and made sure that Sudeten Crisis, the solicitor that was put in place in control of the Austrian police, ensured that he became the Chancellor of Austria. At 8 p.m. that day, the same day, 11th of March 1938, Sudeten Crisis, the solicitor, became the Chancellor of Austria. He immediately claimed that Austria was in a state of chaos and requested German help to restore peace. Yeah? On the 12th of March, Nazi troops invaded Austria. However, the invasion was badly planned, with tanks having to stop at Austrian petrol stations to fill up with fuel, and commanders using tourist guides to find their way to the capital, Vienna. What is going on? It's a shambles, it seems like. However, Not a single drop of blood was shed, and people cheered for the troops as they entered the towns, giving gifts and flowers to the soldiers. Mussolini stayed true to the anti-Comintern pact and did not oppose Anschluss. So basically, the Nazis were able to go into Austria and implement Anschluss because Mussolini had promised Hitler that he would not intervene. On the 10th of April, Hitler held the plebiscite that he had discussed with the Sudeten Crisis, and even though there were a significant presence of Nazi stormtroopers putting pressure on people, the votes came through, and 99% of Austrians voted in favour of Anschluss, in turn in Hitler's eyes, making Anschluss legal. And that is Anschluss, 1938. And the last thing that I want to talk to you about is the Sudeten Crisis. As you can see there, we've got the paper talking about this crisis, and you can look at the map there as well, talking to you about, basically showing where Germany is and where the Sudetenland is also. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I am just going to focus on a few things. Right. Now, 1938. Sorry, people. I had some people talking a bit of rubbish in the chat room. I had to block them. So, 1938. Sudeten Crisis. Yeah? Fantastic. Right. So, why did Hitler target the Sudetenland? As you can see, Sudetenland there is marked in orange. Czechoslovakia had been set up under the Treaty of Versailles, which Hitler had promised to overturn. He saw the Sudetenland as his first step in destroying Czechoslovakia and righting another wrong of the Treaty of Versailles. That being said, Czechoslovakia did have a big army and had significant fortifications. The Sudetenland was home to forts, railways and industries which, in Hitler's mind, could all be used in his war effort. Also, the area had many factories producing glass, ignite, which is a type of coal, as well as the Skoda factory, which could be used to build tanks and other weapons. The Sudetenland was also home to around 3 million German-speaking people, which made up about 20% of the population. Okay, so using similar tactics to those used in Austria, the Nazis in the Sudetenland started demonstrations to weaken the government. In May 1938, Hitler made it clear that he would fight for the region, claiming that German-speaking people were being treated badly by the Czechs and needed protection. As tensions rose, Europe held its breath, having seen the devastating bombing campaigns of the Spanish Civil War. People were petrified that war could break out on the continent and that civilians would become the target of the Luftwaffe. Politicians in Britain and France racked their brains to find a way to stop Hitler invading the Sudetenland, knowing that if he did, Britain and France could be obliged to protect Czechoslovakia and declare war. September 1938, 15th of September 1938 actually, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain met up with Adolf Hitler at his mountain home again. And Hitler told Chamberlain that the crisis could only be resolved if he was allowed the Sudetenland. Chamberlain was desperate to avoid war and agreed, so long as all actions were peaceful. This became known as appeasement, which is the desire to avoid war by giving up concessions. So allowing your enemy to do what they wanted, but with restrictions. Chamberlain then met with the Czechs and forced them to agree to Hitler's terms. On the 22nd of September 1938, Chamberlain returned to Germany and met Hitler at Bad Godesberg, a town in western Germany. Hitler changed his demands now. He now wanted the Sudetenland to be handed over by the 1st of October and insisted that Hungary and Poland should also receive Czech land. This was not what Chamberlain had agreed to. Hitler was demanding more and more and more. It was beginning to seem like war was looming. So the question I got for you there, to go with that, is I want you to think about why did Hitler want to take the Sudetenland, and what were Adolf Hitler's demands? Okay, brilliant. Moving on. What happened after the Sudeten Crisis? What happened after the Sudeten Crisis? Now, the Czechoslovakian army were told to leave the Sudetenland. Yeah? Hungary and Poland wanted to claim parts of Czechoslovakia, which is really, really important. Really important. The Czech government had not been consulted on how the people of the Sudetenland found themselves as the newest members of the Greater Germany. German Sudetens greeted Nazi soldiers with flowers just like Austrians in March 1938. The Czechs were very fearful as the troops marched across their border. To them this seemed like a real invasion. The USSR was also not consulted. Hitler was getting closer to countries that the USSR had close relationships with. Stalin started to question what he could do to prevent invasion by Hitler's forces, and was convinced that the answer did not lie in diplomacy, so basically did not lie in talking about things. In spite of all of this, Chamberlain claimed that the Munich conference that he had with Adolf Hitler, talking about what was going to happen with Sudetenland, he claimed that it was a great victory for Britain. As Chamberlain stepped out off of his private plane back in England, proclaiming how fantastic the Anglo-German declaration was from the Munich Agreement, Adolf Hitler declared that Europe could look forward to a peaceful Christmas because of the Munich Agreement. This was the first time Hitler had invaded a country where he had no claim. There were no German-speaking people in Czechoslovakia outside of Sudetenland, and the country had not been German prior to the Treaty of Versailles. Britain and France could no longer hide behind the claim that Hitler was simply taking what was rightfully his. Czechoslovakia was a strong country. With support, it could have fought the Nazis, preventing a full-scale world war. This opportunity was lost. The Sudeten Crisis, some people think, was the last straw, was the last step prior to the outbreak of war. So, last thing that I want you to do. I've got 4 exam questions there. I want you to try and answer those four exam questions for tomorrow, prior to the next videos that I put up. They are all 8-mark exam questions. It says write an account. So that basically means it wants you to describe the topic. Yeah? Whatever the topic is, it wants you to describe it. I know you lot can do that. I know you lot have revised really hard. We're on day 2 of the half term. Our exams coming up Monday, 4th of June. That's all my year 11 students. Monday, 4th of June. I know you can do it. I'm here with you every step of the way, like I promised I would be. I want you to keep it safe. I want you to revise. I want you to answer these questions. And I want you to remember that you are all fantastic. I'll catch you soon. Tomorrow, in fact. Peace.